Hey, welcome to Board Gems. In this regular video series, I talk about older board games, and I discuss whether I think they're still gems or not. Spoiler alert, they're usually still gems, otherwise I wouldn't bother talking about them, but sometimes I get requests. This is an old game, but it had a recent reprint. The original is not very well known at all, except in certain hobby circles. It's from designer Michael Schacht, and it was originally self-published. He had a relatively well-known game at the time called Kardinal König, or Cardinal and King. And in English, this became known as Web of Power. It's one of those meaty, but still simple and short games, if that makes sense. So it's like a 45-minute game, and the rules are really simple, but every decision really matters. It's a really great game, which I'll cover at some point. Web of Power begat China, which begat Han, which begat Iwari is a more recent iteration. That's from ThunderGryph. Now there's another new game from ThunderGryph. I mean new, it's 2018, it's not that new, but newish of an old game. And this old game was the Cardinal and King card game. Never published by like a proper publisher. Michael Schacht's own kind of little solo publishing house. Spiele auf Timbuktu, I think is what it was called. They self-published it. I think you could do a print and play as well, but they also printed like properly a few hundred copies to release at Essen or something. Around 2003, we see a new version of this come out from Ravensburger. Now, Ravensburger had a line they were developing of two-player games, presumably in response to the two-player Cosmos line, which I think was pretty popular. So Ravensburger was starting their own. They called it the Fun for Two line. And I've actually covered already two games in that series, one called Crazy Chicken and one called Baker Street. This one is Richelieu. Which is kind of clever because it's the Cardinal and King card game, so we got to have a cardinal on there, right? Cardinal Richelieu. This one is for two players only. This was the only version around for 15 years until about 2018, where ThunderGryph releases something called Spirits of the Forest. I sometimes make fun of forest spirit themes in games. It's funny to encounter one that's literally forest spirits, like the name is Forest Spirits. Exact same gameplay as Richelieu, but they make it a 2 to 4 player game. And the only real difference is they just add a few extra components. That doesn't make it good for that many players. It's still best with 2. But at least it's possible to play with more if you want to. They also added a solo mode because you need that nowadays. It's funny, the original had a weight of 2.57 on BGG, which is just crazy when you think about it, that this simple game, its predecessor, which is not really any more complicated, has this massive weight rating on BGG. Games were different then. How we approached weight was different then. What we felt was a meaty game was different back then. So anyway, the original was for 3 to 5, but this is 2 to 4. Takes about 30 minutes to play. And ages, I see no reason why 8 and up wouldn't be able to play. I think actually Richelieu says 12 and up, which is an exaggeration. It can be quite a thinky game because there's a lot of face-up information, and each turn is very simple, but there's still, a lot of if I do this, then maybe you do that, and then that means I do this, but what if you do this instead? Then maybe I should do that kind of thought process. And being kind of an abstract-ish experience, maybe little kids won't like it, but I see no reason why 8-year-olds couldn't play it from a maturity point of view. Let me show you how it plays. I'll show you with this one. This is the most recent one, right? And then afterwards, let's talk about whether it's still a gem or not. To set up the game, shuffle the 48 tiles and lay them out face up in 4 rows of 12. Now, looking at the anatomy of the tiles, you can think of each color of tile as a particular suit. All of the 8s that are of this color have the same symbol. That's a particular suit. And that number is how many of that symbol is spread out among all the tiles. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All these 8s have this symbol. All these 8s have this symbol. All the 10s have this symbol. But there's also 3 other icons, a lick of flame, a sun, and a moon. And they are spread out among all the tiles, all the suits. You're going to take these tokens. There's one for each of the different symbols, and also one for each one of those 3 icons, and 2 pluses, which I'll explain later. But you're going to mix these up and place 8 of them on the tiles in this pattern. And the other ones, just put them back in the box. Don't look at them. Each player gets 3 reservation markers. In this edition, they're gems. In a 2-player game, you're going to get 3, but in a 3 or 4-player game, you're only going to get 2. That's all there is to set up. This is a majorities game. The goal of the game is to get the majorities of as many symbols as possible. The player who has the most of this symbol is going to score as points at the end of the game the number of this symbol that they've collected. So if they've collected 2 and everybody else has collected 1 or fewer, then they're going to score 2 points at the end of the game. If they had all 5, they would score 5 points. In addition, any player who does not have any of a particular suit, a particular tile, is going to lose 3 points at the end of the game. So you want to get a little bit of everything, but you also are trying to get the most things, the most of everything as much as you can. And that also includes these 3 icons here. There's 9 moons, there's 9 suns, 9 licks of flame. Whoever has the most is going to score a number of points equal to the number that they collected. Anybody else scores 0 points, or if they didn't collect that symbol at all, they're going to score -3 points. Now you will get icons from claiming these tiles. You may also get these symbols from collecting these tokens. You don't know what they are in advance, but if you collect a tile with a token on it, you collect the token, you look at it secretly, and that may count as a symbol of that type at the end of the game. Although it doesn't help you avoid the -3. If you have a token that has this symbol, but you didn't collect any of these 4 tiles, that would still count as -3 at the end. But they do help you get the majority. Ties are friendly. If 2 players are tied, they both get the points. On your turn, you can claim 1 or 2 tiles. The start player can only take 1. You can take any tile that's on an end of a row. So the start player will have access to these 8 tiles, and they can take any one of those. On a normal turn, you can take 2 tiles under a certain condition. They have to be the same color, and they can only have 1 of that suit's icon on it each. If you take a tile with 2 of the suit symbol on it, then that's the only tile you're getting. But if you're able to, you can collect 2 tiles as long as they're the same color and they each only have 1 of that suit symbol. The other icons on the tiles don't matter for that. Now the start player is not allowed to do that in case it's a very sweet setup. You know, the starting setup might have pairs on the ends here. A player could take a tile on one end, and if the second tile is of the same suit and also has 1 icon on it, then they could take that one as well, because that's the new end of the row. So you take 1 or 2 tiles. And if you take a tile and it has a token on it, you take the token and look at it and then keep it face down. Before the next player's turn, you can place or move a reservation marker. A reservation marker makes it expensive for any other player to take the tile that it is on. So after you take your 1 tile, say I take this one, I'm the start player, so I can't take 2, even though there's another one right here. And I put that in front of me. If later on I get more of that same suit, I can stack them like this so everybody can always see how many of that suit that I have. And then afterwards, I take one of my markers that I have in my supply here, and I place it on any tile, like this. If all 3 of my markers are on the board, then instead I can choose to move one. This makes it expensive for another player to claim it. Each tile can only have at most 1 of these reservation markers. If another player, say yellow, wants to take this tile, they would have to pay 1 of their reservation markers and take it out of the game. Now they have 1 fewer for the rest of the game. This player would get theirs back, but they the yellow player in this case can now take this tile. If later on it comes back to purple and purple wants this tile, then purple could just take it and they get their gem back for reuse later. So it's a way to sort of reserve a tile. Another player can still claim it, but it's just expensive for them because they would then lose a gem. It is, however, possible to get gems back. Some of the tokens have a plus symbol on them. If you get a token with a plus symbol, you just hang on to it, and later on, after you've paid to claim a tile that someone else had the reservation marker on, that gem would go out of the game, but you can return this plus token and get your gem back. That's more commonly done at the end of the game when there are fewer tiles available and a lot of them are being reserved, and you probably won't need your reservation markers for much longer anyway because the game's almost over, may as well spend them. In a normal full game, you play until all the tiles are claimed. You can play a short game in which you only play until any 3 rows are claimed, which is actually kind of interesting too. But I would only recommend that for a 2-player game because otherwise it's just really short. And each player, for each suit and each of these icons, counts how many they have. At this point, players will want to reveal any of their tokens that have symbols on them. So this will count as an extra symbol for this suit, if I have it. And you total up who has the most. And the player with the most of that symbol will score that many points. Do that for each of the 9 suits, as well as the 3 icons. Any players who tie will get the points. Ties are friendly. And then finally look and see what suits and what symbols, these icons here, that players don't have any tiles of. These don't help with that. You have to have at least 1 tile of everything. And if you don't, you lose 3 points for every symbol that you don't have any tile of. And the player with the most points wins. Pretty simple, right? Well, that's how you play Spirits of the Forest. One thing I like about Richelieu, and I'm going to call it Richelieu because that's the version I'm most familiar with. Spirits of the Forest is new to me. It has a longer name anyway. It's harder to say. I like that it's almost perfect information. So you see all the tiles that are laid out, and you can easily see what moves you have available to you. And you can get into a little bit of a back and forth, right? Thinking it through. Like, if I do this, oh, then they'll do that, and then I'll do this. Now, I don't like every game like that. I like chess, but it hurts my brain, right? Because you can do that, like, 10 times. If I do this, and they'll do that, and they'll do that, and you just go, and it's dizzying. I could imagine if you were to play Richelieu with the same opponent again and again and again, you might get a slight chess-like feel for it. As you become more familiar with the game, you can kind of gradually get a little bit more look ahead. But there's an upper limit to how much look ahead you can do because of the face-down tokens. You don't know what you're going to get. If you leave that for your opponent, what's your opponent going to get? And so there's that tiny little bit of uncertainty that keeps you from overanalyzing. And so as a result, it still gives me, at least, a kind of a casual feel. It's a thinky game that feels casual, which is a combination that I like quite a lot. And so I think of something like the Rose King, which again looks and feels kind of abstract-like, but there is a bit of randomness in Rose King, the card draws, and in this, those face-down tokens, that just prevents that from being, a complete tit-for-tat sort of experience. You can't look ahead too much. So you have a few options available to you, and you have to prioritize. You see a good opportunity. You might see 2 tiles that are the same suit, and each has a different second icon on it. And so that's usually good if you can get both of those in one turn. If you take that, maybe you're more concerned that there's another thing over on the other side that your opponent will get. So you have to prioritize which one is more important. Should I take this and reserve that? Or take that and reserve this? And then what will the opponent do? Will they pay to get that because they really need that? But the reservation markers add a little bit of uncertainty too, because you're adding an additional cost to the tile, and you don't know exactly how much your opponent's going to value that. Does your opponent want that tile enough that they're willing to pay one of their reservation markers to take it? Maybe not. Maybe it's like, oh, it's too expensive, I'm not going to take it at all. Or maybe, yeah, I'll take it, but later in the game, if it's still there, when I need my reservation markers less. But then how long do you wait, right? Because obviously, if your opponents put a reservation marker down, it's easy for them to take it. And if you want it, and you don't want your opponent to have it, then probably you do want to pay that marker. But at what point, right? You don't want to give up your reservation markers too early. If you do, you're wrecking your chances. Ideally, you wait until kind of the end of the game, closer to the end of the game, before you spend them. Because you'll need them less by the end, and they have no value at the end of the game. So then it's a little bit of a game of chicken, right? You put a reservation marker on there, you can take that any time. But you're also kind of confident, like, well, while that reservation marker's there, I don't think Daryl is going to want to take that tile yet, right? It's too expensive for him. He doesn't want to lose his marker yet. But at some point, he's going to decide he wants that and he's willing to spend the marker. Probably I should take that before he does that. But when does he make that choice? Sometimes when you are looking at the board and you're saying, well, there's one obvious play, right? I see 2 of the 6 tiles, and they each have a single of their suit symbols on them, and they each have a different, extra icon. So that's usually like, well, that's a really good play to be able to take 2 of the same type, right? And it gets some extra symbols. The more symbols, the better. So sometimes you look at it and go, okay, for right now, there's a bit of an obvious play as to which tiles to take. Not an obvious play which tiles to put a reservation marker on. People don't like it when there's one obvious best move, but I think that a lot of gamers, a lot of hobbyists, when they talk about that, they devalue the idea that the game is all about decisions. And if you reach the point where you have an obvious decision, it's not obvious how you got to that point. Yes, maybe it's an obvious move for right now, but how did you get here? How did you reach this point? Surely there was a decision you made a turn ago, 2 turns ago, 3 turns ago, and decisions your opponents made that led to this point and this obvious move. I personally consider it a 2-player game because, well, the version I own is Richelieu, and that is a 2-player game. It's interesting that the original Cardinal and King card game was 3 to 5 players. It wasn't even officially 2 players. Then Michael Schacht modified it into a 2-player only game. Then later on modified it again to Spirits of the Forest, which is a 2 to 4 player game, but basically unchanged from Richelieu. The only difference, I think, is the penalty if you don't have all of a symbol. If you don't have any tiles of a particular suit. In Richelieu, the penalty is -5. In Spirits of the Forest, it's -3. I mean, it's the same number of tiles in play, regardless of the number of players, 2, 3, or 4. So it makes sense. In a 4-player game, each player is going to collect fewer tiles, and it's more likely that players will be short-suited, that they won't be able to get any tiles of a particular suit. And so in a multiplayer game, it makes sense that that penalty is a little bit smaller. But I do think it's best with 2 players. It's acceptable with 3. I would not play it with 4. In a 3 or 4 player game, you only use 2 reservation markers instead of 3, which is fine. So, a 2-player game, there's 6 markers out there. In a 3-player game, there's 6 markers out there. In a 4-player game, there's 8 markers out there, and 8 is too many. Too many reservation markers. There's only 8 tiles available at any given time. I really would strongly advise not playing this game 4 players, in my opinion. For me, it is mostly a 2-player game, but if we have 3 and the other 2 players really want to play it, I'll be like, yeah, sure, I'll play it with 3. Or you guys can go ahead and I'll do something else, right? But I'm fine to play it with 3. It's fine. The original game, the Cardinal and King card game, was 3 to 5 players, but it also had more tiles. These versions have, I think, 48 tiles, and the original Web of Power card game, that one I think had 56. So it's better to have more tiles when you have more players. And I probably would have preferred, if they were going to make this a 2 to 4 player game, that they had more tiles, and then say like, oh, if you're playing 2 players, take some out. I think more tiles is much, much better for a multiplayer game, and each player gets more turns. Because you know how, like in Carcassonne, you have like 72 tiles, and you're playing a 2-player game, that gives each player 36 turns. But if you're playing a 5-player game, each player gets 14-ish turns compared to 36, right? That's a big difference. And that's why Carcassonne feels better with fewer players. Because each player has more control because they have more turns. So for multiplayer, I wish they had added more tiles. But what's in the box here for Spirits of the Forest is completely fine as a great 2-player game. And it's an okay 3-player game, and it's a bad 4-player game. I guess if I had one complaint about it, and it's not... I don't actually consider it a complaint because it's just describing a different type of game than what it is. It would be nice if there was a little bit more room for subtlety. You'd like to think like, oh, I have a token in one suit. I'm going to try to tie my opponent in this suit, and then I can reveal that token and get the win out of it. Or they think that they have won it by 1, but actually they tied. And that happens, but it doesn't feel super intentional, right? Because you don't have any control over what those face-down tokens are that you're able to claim. So overall, the game isn't particularly subtle, but I wouldn't describe games that have a lot of face-up information particularly subtle anyway. So it's just describing a different type of game than what this is. I will note that if you, for some reason, want to seek out this one, maybe because you love the color pink, I know I do, there's actually 2 versions of this lower one. One has tiles and one has cards. And I've seen both, and the boxes, as far as I could tell, were identical. So if you get this, you're not sure necessarily what you're going to get. The game works perfectly fine with cards or tiles. I'm just making that observation because I'm not sure. I don't know how many other people have noticed that, have known that. And I happen to notice it, so I'm sharing it. As a 2-player game, again, Richelieu is completely fine, and you could add components to make it a 3 or 4-player game. But again, I would only consider doing it maybe to play 3 players, and normally just play this with 2. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with this version, as long as you don't care about the literal forest spirit theme, which does actually bug me. And I know I'm probably sound like a broken record, right? I always complain about, the forest spirit themes and anthropomorphic animals and stuff. It's quite acute here because you have all these different suits, and each suit has a different icon representing the suit, and it could be a spider web or a dewdrop or something. The icons aren't very iconic, if that makes sense. They're very abstract. They don't really look much like, I think, what they're supposed to look like. They're very artistic, but also it's not very clear what they are. So when you're describing the game, or you're talking about, hey, let's do this suit now, so we're finished the game, let's score this suit, and then we'll score that suit, it's hard to say, well, what suit are you talking about? Because, I don't even know what this thing is that you're describing. Richelieu, all the tiles, or cards, some of the versions have cards, have a little, French provincial name or something on them. So when you're scoring, you can just identify that. Say, let's score this province now. There's no name on the Spirits of the Forest ones, so it's just hard in practice to go, let's score dewdrops? Wait, which ones are the dewdrops? I can't even tell just by looking at them. So, if you're interested in this game, this is the most recent version, probably the one that's easiest to find. Components are nice. I will have, either before or after this video, a side-by-side comparison of these 2 editions. And there is one complaint I would make about Spirits of the Forest, is the gems. A problem that you have with transparent tokens like this, and it's a mistake that publishers often make, and I mentioned in the video, which was already recorded, but I'm not sure if I'm making that one live before this one. But anyway, a recent Reiner Knizia reprint of a great game called Orongo is called Nyakuza, and they did the same thing, is they have transparent tokens, and looks great, except they get placed on cardboard, or whether, a physical board or these tiles, and those tiles are different colors. And so it becomes less obvious. Like if this was an opaque yellow, it would look yellow regardless of what color tile it's on. But because it's transparent, some of the color bleeds through. And sometimes it makes the yellow look a little green, or the green look a little yellow. Or even if they do look different side by side, maybe they're not side by side. And it takes your brain a second or two to wait, is that my... Yes, that is my token. Right? It's just a silly decision. They should have been opaque. They look nice as transparent, but it does affect gameplay just a tiny bit of the user experience. It comes with a solo mode, which now I'm not the best judge of solo modes. I do not enjoy playing board games solo. I did try this solo mode. I don't like solo modes anyway, but this to me was a particularly bad solo mode. It's actually what they describe sounds like a nice little puzzle. It's just the tiles that are face up on the ends. Everything else is face down. And on your turn, you pick, one row, and you decide one tile to keep for yourself and one tile to keep for your virtual opponent. That sounded great. That sounded really smart. And just a simple little puzzle that you can play with the existing components. Doesn't really feel anything like regular Spirits of the Forest, but a nice little solo puzzle using the same components. I found it incredibly easy. Extremely easy. Did I play some rules wrong? I don't think so. But it just seemed ridiculously easy, and that basically you would always win when you played. Definitely, if you go for Spirits of the Forest, I would recommend against trying to find the little expansions and modules that came out for it. It's just trying... They always do this. I don't necessarily blame ThunderGryph. This is just what publishers do nowadays. But they always feel like the base game to them doesn't feel enough. Or maybe they feel like they want to attract people who have an older version, and so they feel compelled to add more stuff to make people want to upgrade. I have no desire to upgrade from this, but if I didn't have Richelieu, I would be very happy to have Spirits of the Forest. But I would, without having played them, I would actively avoid any of those modules, expansions for them. Don't try to make the game into something it's not. It's a nice, quick, thinky, 30-ish minute game. And it's great fun, especially as a two-player game. And you don't have to add complexity to make it more fun. I know a lot of hobbyists would think like, oh, there's not enough variety in the box, so you need to add modules and expansions to increase the variety. The variety is the random setup. You're not learning a new game every time. You're just analyzing that setup, and you're going from there. And that random setup, that's how the game is different every time. Don't bother with any of those modules, but just as a straight 2 and sometimes 3-player game, I'm quite a fan of it. Thank you for watching. Older games like Kardinal König, Das Kartenspiel, or Richelieu, or Spirits of the Forest, they don't stop being good games. They're still good games. Take care.